Every day we walk into places that demand we shut off a part of who we are. We joke about the absurdity of shows like Severance,
where people literally break their work selves from their personal lives.
but the more we look at our real offices, is it really that far-fetched? Because what we found is these spaces could be engineered to divide us into worker and human. In some cases, even causing serious illnesses. And it's weirdly connected to this internet obsession of the backrooms. So if offices are so dehumanizing, why aren't we fixing them? But first, I want to tell you a story about an office building that went very wrong. In the late 70s, a new building opened in Washington, D.C. that was supposed to be the pinnacle of energy-efficient design, with big open floors and windows that were sealed to save energy, so no drafts and no wasted heat. Even the decor was nice and standardized, with plush carpets, acoustic ceilings, and fluorescent lights. Pretty fancy for that time. At first, it seemed like the ultimate workplace for the future, but then people started getting sick with headaches and nausea, which initially they brushed it off as office stress. But then came the coughs and the burning eyes and symptoms very similar to asthma. Eventually, they hired engineers to do a study, and they discover something very disturbing. Extremely high levels of chemicals, like glue fumes from the carpeting and off-gassing from the furniture, all swirling around in this stale indoor environment without any fresh air, because the building was so tightly sealed up in the name of energy efficiency. But the craziest part is it wasn't even just any random building. It was the headquarters of the Environmental Protection Agency. Yeah, the same people whose job is to regulate indoor air quality. The sick building syndrome is a real condition where people experience symptoms like headaches and fatigue and irritation that vanish as soon as they leave the building. And most of these symptoms occur in buildings like this, with poor ventilation and off-gassing from cheap standardized materials. Of course, we do have much better regulations now on things like air quality, but these type of offices are still around, operational. They might have slapped on some new HVAC systems, but I've personally worked in offices where the windows don't open and the air from the ventilation system just feels off, and it was either freezing cold or always hot, and the indoor air just always felt stale. It really feels like it's optimized for robots, not people. So how do we get here in the first place? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Money. It's sad to say, but my experience of being an architect is that the budget usually has the biggest impact on the design. There's also the cost of the land and permitting costs and operational costs, and most of these office buildings are developer-driven projects, so they are going to be squeezing you for higher returns on their investment. And all of this puts pressure on the architects to churn out these airtight boxes. From a purely financial point of view, a hermetically sealed structure without any windows or louvers makes perfect sense, because it's cheaper to build and cheaper to operate. Then you throw in some fluorescent lighting and some off-the-shelf cubicles, and voila! You got yourself a tightly managed machine for efficiency. And there's two moments in history, or two people, that we can blame for this. This guy, the father of scientific management, Frederick Taylor, believed work wasn't just work, it was a science. He believed efficiency could be engineered, tasks could be measured, people could be optimized. So the spaces they work in, well, it's kind of the perfect petri dish. So his vision is what gave birth to the open plan office. Typically, the work floor was on the bottom and the manager's floor was on top, so they could keep an eye on the workers all the time. Basically, a factory floor, except the machines were people. And then in the 60s, we get this guy, who who did have good intentions and wanted to liberate the workers. He designed a more flexible system called the Action Office, with movable partitions and personal workstations that were intended to spark creativity. A similar idea popped up in Europe called Bürolandschaft, which again championed flexibility. But then corporations hijacked this idea and the Action Office was mutated into the cubicle farm. Cheap standard boxes that gave the illusion of privacy, but basically became little mini solitary cells. Propst actually watched this in horror and called it monolithic insanity. And with that, ceilings got lower, with the acoustic tiles flattening any sense of life. Fluorescent lights drained any and all sense of warmth, but they're cheap, they're bright, and they're eternal. And of course, the carpets. Miles of dull gray that trap the dust and dull the sound, but sure is cost effective. And so, here we are. Now we can talk about Severance, which takes this and turns it into a full-scale office horror. In the show, people get their memories surgically split in half voluntarily. Your outie lives a normal life, free from work, and your innie is condemned to an endless eternity in the office, never seeing daylight or going home. The perfect solution? Most of the show's scenes were filmed in this building, which is a mid-century modern landmark, and was considered groundbreaking at the time for its vast atrium and minimalist design. The production team also drew inspiration from other corporate campuses from the 60s, like this building by the famous architect Eero Saarinen, with clean lines and functionalist geometry. The result is an environment where every surface feels engineered for efficiency rather than comfort, and your whole world is a desk, a phone, and a pen. Now, Severance is about this evil corporation that controls people through a pretty extreme procedure, but there's a much subtler way of doing this, through information that we are fed every single day. One of the tools that I use to control the information that I'm reading, and really how I see the world, is Ground News, who's also the sponsor of today's video. Ground News is a website and an app that gathers news from around the world into one place, and it gives you tons of insights on the reliability of that source, like the political biases and who owns these publications, and which stories are underreported. One of my favorite tools is the blind spot feed, where you can get introduced to articles you might not normally see if you were just relying on the algorithm. It's really made me challenge my own biases and broaden my perspectives, which I think is kind of important for being a critical thinker, especially now when platforms are backed by billionaires and have more power than ever to push their own agendas. I really think having something like Ground News is worth it. If you want to try it out, you can get a pretty big discount if you use the link ground.news/Dammy or use this QR code. You can get 40% off the Vantage Plan, which includes all of the tools that I mentioned and a lot more.
You might have heard of the term memory palace. It's a technique where you memorize items by placing them in vivid, recognizable spots in a familiar environment, like your childhood home. Neuroscientists found that rich spatial cues, like colors and textures, are really important in helping our brains encode memories.
So in Severance, by systematically removing everything and anything that could create an emotional anchor, essentially you create an anti-memory palace. So it's not just this intrusive procedure, but the entire environment that severs your memory from your identity. Which leads us to the Backrooms. It's an internet lore that really caught on. You accidentally slip out of reality into this endless maze of generic rooms and hallways, and there's this faint smell of wet carpet and this perpetual hum of electricity, but no sign of life. It's an extreme form of liminal space, which we've talked about on the channel before, but it's this transitional space between spaces, spaces that don't necessarily have a function of their own, like hallways or stairways or lobbies, but it's endless. Synopsia is probably the term closest to describing this unsettling feeling that you get when you're in this place that's supposed to be bustling with activity, but now it's abandoned. So it feels familiar, but it's off. It's neither here nor there. Time and logic have completely dissolved. So Severance uses this concept and turns the office into the most unsettling version of itself. This featureless space with no purpose, where time is an infinite loop and escape is impossible. It is kind of scary, but not really in the usual sense, because the real terror is the banality and this creeping suspicion that you're stuck in this perpetual state of blandness. So, offices. Are they getting better? Well, yeah! Look at all these new perks! Cafeterias and laundry rooms and even gyms. But you know, I heard a really interesting quote the other day. When what you eat becomes your boss's business, they are buying more than your time. They are buying your whole self. In other words, frictionless work. It merges your work-life boundaries. Because if you never need to leave the building, does your outside identity even matter?
A lot of this might be stemming from the fact that many office jobs these days revolve around tasks that are kind of intangible. Spreadsheets and Zoom calls and data wrangling. And sometimes it can be kind of hard to see the point of all of it. Our work is becoming more and more separated from the final product. And this disconnect between your work and the end goal has also been linked to higher burnout. Because if the output is invisible, how do you measure success? What is the goal? And again, we're back in this perpetual state of transition without a destination. And maybe that's why we created this thing called corporate culture. With corporate lingo like synergy and low-hanging fruit, it's almost like we're training ourselves to think in corporate code. So our offices become not just physical structures, but entire systems that shape our language, behavior, and identity.
So much so that in some places, sleeping in public is considered a badge of honor. It's a sign that you're working so hard that you barely have enough time to sleep at home. Just think about how weird that is. But here, it's so normal that people barely even notice it. It's almost like it's an office cult, which, if we circle back to Severance for a sec, that's the entire premise. It's a culture that's so controlling and immersive, you literally lose track of who you are outside of work. But history shows that every time offices push too far, people do push back. From the first union battles in the 1900s to today's quiet cubicle rebellions. Compliance is not always guaranteed, so there is still hope. Where does your identity end and your job begin? I think that's the real question here. These office walls, they're not just backdrops. They're tools that shape how we think and talk and even see ourselves. We all have to work in some form or another. And I just don't believe in this hard division between work and life. And I think when you can merge the two, it can improve both and it can lead to a much more fulfilling life.
You know, I don't even like the phrase work-life balance. I think it's misleading. I prefer the phrase work-life harmony.
Because I know that if I am energized at work, feeling like I'm adding value, that makes me better at home. And likewise,
if I'm good at home, then I'm going to be energized at work. I'm going to be a
better boss, a better employee.
I understand you're not happy with the life you've been given. But eventually, we all have to accept our reality. So here it is. I am a person you are not. But that's just me. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.